Okay, so in this session, we're going to look at the timescale of the 51st Amendment. We're going to be looking at what's new, what stayed the same, getting the data into Formpak, and then we have time at the end for some questions. I assume that most people are au fait with IFRA and what they do within the fragrance industry, but maybe just a little background might help some people. So the International Fragrance Association has been going since the early 1970s, and they're an industry body that helps the promotion and safe use of fragrances. They issue amendments to their standards, which typically prohibit the use of some fragrance ingredients, apply a specification to some fragrance ingredients, or apply limits of use, which typically are applied in the end-use product across a range of different categories. And the end-use products that are used in the fragrance industry typically fall into 1 to 12 of these categories. And that essentially, with the limits applied to the individual ingredients in the fragrance, it can give an overall maximum use level for each different category for the fragrance oil in whichever product is being used. IFRA applies to all its members globally, and at the same time, there's no different implementation dates in different regions. And all good and wholesome fragrance houses are IFRA members and adhere to the standards, although they have no basis in law. So on to the actual 51st Amendment. This was published June the 30th, 2023. And it's available to download with the link on the screen. Just a note to say that the slides and the recording will be made available after the presentation. So you will actually have the link to click, or you'll be able to view the recording and make a note of it. The information in this link includes the standards and the guidance on the application of the standards, and there's quite a lot of information in there, and that's freely available to members and non-members alike. So from this date, publication date, the timeline is 4 months to update IT systems and exchange information on bases and natural complex substances within the industry, so that's sort of supplier to fragrance house or fragrance house to fragrance house. Then there's an additional 3 months to exchange information with customers. So that takes us up to the 30th of January 2024. And during this time period, all fragrance creations and the projects entered to develop these fragrance creations are classed as existing. So then from January the 30th, 2024, there's a 2-month period to ensure compliance for new creations, and then an additional 19 months after that to ensure compliance for existing creations. And during this time period, and that's till October the 30th, 2025, all projects to develop fragrance creations as their output are classed as new. Other fragrance creations before that are existing. The Formpak reality is slightly different from the IFRA timescale, in that the 51st Amendment uses the same quantitative risk assessment version 2 methodology that was introduced with the 49th Amendment. So what this means in Formpak is that the existing Formpak property groups, the applications, the suitability constraints, and documents will be reused and updated with 51st Amendment data. When this happens, there will be an immediate switch from previous, whether that's 49th or 50th, to the 51st Amendment data, and any compliant checks and documents printed from that time on will be based on the new limits for all items in your Formpak system, whether they're new or existing. So this means that users should ensure 49th, 50th compliance prior to updating the properties with 51st Amendment data, as this will ensure any future non-conformities that are reported are due to an additional 51st restriction. Any IFRA documents that are printed, not previewed, prior to the data import will still be available as an historic version with visibility on the property values. This means that you can always review the historic property values at the time the IFRA certificate was printed before the 51st data was entered and see the status of the formulation's compliance. So here we have an example of that. We have a formulation, and if I click on the Documents tab, we can see that IFRA documents have been printed for this item up to version 2. So if we click on the document link here, it opens a new window and shows us those two versions. If you click on either version and view details, you can see the values of properties at the time this version was created. So we can see the IFRA categories 1 to 12 with their values, and we can also see any components that were reported and their amounts. It's also then possible to print the version as it appeared then, and it has the historic watermark, and we see those values in the document. So that was how the document was actually sent when it was sent version 1. So what's new in the 51st Amendment? There's no longer any molecular formula nor structure in the actual standards themselves. Some of the standards have many different isomers covered by them, and it's a very lengthy document if all possible structures are included, and it was felt to be not particularly useful for users. Also, references to Annex 1 or Annex 2 or both have been updated, as there will be only one annex going forward. The wording on all relevant standards has been changed to read "See Annex on contributions from other sources." So here we see an example of the same item, methyl and methylanthranilate. And on the left is the 49th Amendment standard, and we see that still includes the molecular formula and the structure, and the 51st on the right, which does not. If we scroll down, we see that there is some change to some of the levels on this item. Many remain at 0.1, but for example, category 7A has changed from no restriction to a maximum use of 0.5%. We also see that instead of the reference to Annex 1 that appears on the 49th on the left, we now have C Annex on contributions from other sources in the 51st standard. And all of this information is available in the download from the link on the first page. There have also been some clarifications to some of the end-use products that fragrances are used in. For paper products, there's clearer guidance on how to apply the IFRA standards. And for some paper products where the fragrance is directly introduced to the item, it's treated as weight for the whole product. But others where maybe a fragrance lotion is applied to a tissue, for example, then it's the lotion that must be IFRA compliant before it's applied to the tissue. For pillow spray, there's a rationale for its placement in category 11B. Reed diffusers, there's a rationale for placing in category 10A. So I think before the 49th Amendment, these were in non-skin category 12, which was a lot more lenient than 10A is. So at the time, there was quite a big requirement for modification for Reed diffusers, especially as there's such a high fragrance dosage product. And so in the 51st Amendment, they remain in category 10A, but there is still ongoing discussion, and it's possible that this will be reviewed in the 52nd Amendment, and they may revert to category 12, but for now, it's still category 10A for Reed diffusers. Category 6, there's an explanation of the change from considering oral products to be rinse off now, whereas they were considered to be leave on before. The term sunblock has been replaced with UV filters, and there's a note about makeup remover, which now includes advice regarding potential exposures to lips. So there's no change into category 1, but there is a note that anyone making such a product should be aware that there is potential exposure to lips. There are new restriction standards for 47 aroma chemicals. So no natural complex substances, but just aroma chemicals. And some of these, based on the entries in the IFRA labeling manual, where more than one entry appears for the items that are IFRA restricted, there's at least 9 that will need a new accumulator in order to apply the IFRA standard to more than one raw material at once. So in Formpak, an accumulator is typically a non-hazardous raw material, and it's used as a component in several other raw materials in order to group the IFRA restricted items together. There are already plenty of existing examples of non-hazardous accumulators, and one of them is rose ketones. So these are several different distinct chemicals with their distinct CAS numbers, but they all share the same rose ketone non-hazardous accumulator to ensure that if more than one of the chemicals is used in a fragrance mixture, they don't exceed the maximum IFRA use in total. So we can have a look at an example of that. This item is damascene alpha, one of the rose ketones. And if we view its properties, we'll see that this item has got its own GHS hazards. It has its own distinct identity. And if we view the composition, we see an IFRA coded item at 100 parts. And if we view that and its properties, we see that it has no GHS hazard data, but it has the IFRA limits applied for each relevant category. Because hazards are typically calculated from composition, so in order to make this raw material not non-hazardous as the accumulator is, then we apply preserve when exploding equals yes, and that preserves the data that's on this raw material, whilst also inheriting the data that is applied on the raw material. So here we see calculated versions of the IFRA limits that are coming from the non-hazardous accumulator. Another example raw material that has an IFRA accumulator is jasmine absolute. And this is a slightly different scenario in that jasmine absolute has its own composition. So the labeling manual entry has several components in jasmine absolute. And here we've inserted the IFRA standard item for it, again at 100 parts. And we see here that again, there's no GHS hazards on this item. But it carries the IFRA data. And this item is not preserved when exploding. So that's preserved when exploding equals no. And that's because it is calculating its GHS hazards from its composition, as well as inheriting the calculated IFRA values from the non-hazardous accumulator. In addition to the new standards, there are revised restriction standards for 10 aroma chemicals. So these are items that have already had an IFRA standard before, but they've been given new limits. Most limits have been reduced. However, some are not that significant and won't be terribly troublesome. For example, geraniol for category 9 has been reduced from 9.2% to 2.8%. So category 9 is rinse-off cosmetic products. And given that fragrance dosage in this category is rarely above 1%, restricting geraniol to 2.8% in that rinse-off product is going to have little impact. There have been some changes to the categories and some of the items, end-use items that appear in them. So category 4 did read aftershaves of all types, and this has now been amended to exclude creams and balms, which are now including in category 5B. Category 5B also includes beard and moustache care added to facial moisturizers and creams. Category 8 includes intimate deodorant spray. That wasn't in the standards before. Category 10A includes manually applied dry cleaning kits. So before the 51st Amendment, Category 10A included dry cleaning kits. These have now been split into manually applied dry cleaning kits, which have the potential for some skin contact. And Category 12 now contains dry cleaning kits, which are added to the dryer as they're non-skin contact. Category 11B includes pillow spray, and Category 12 includes the dry cleaning kits that are added to a dryer, along with dryer sheets, fabric conditioner sheets, and they've all moved from Category 10A into 12, so they'll be less restricted. And Category 12 has got 2 new applications added, toilet gel and scent beads. So any Formpak users that have real applications set up, i.e. to represent any of these products that are linked to the IFRA category applications, which apply the suitability constraints, will need to review that the links remain correct. So here we have an example of 2 applications. So we have aftershave and we have aftershave balm. So previously to IFRA 51st, both of these would be in IFRA category 4. Aftershave remains in IFRA category 4, so this application needs no amendment. However, aftershave balm, which was in category 4, now needs to be changed to category 5B. So modify the application, remove the link to IFRA category 4 and add the link to 5B. Save. Some highlights of the new and amended standards, I mean, mostly lowlights. A couple of things: anisaldehyde, 4-methoxy alpha methyl benzene propanol limits have increased. Hooray! Most other limits are more restricted than they were before. I mean, also hooray, because that means the public are even more safe than they were. Yay! Methyl eugenol and estragol have been given lower limits. These are already quite low, and so the use of natural complex substances, basil, tarragon, nutmeg, etc., their use is affected and may require some modification work. Phototoxicity didn't used to apply to rinse-off products. However, it is now applied, and as we saw earlier, methyl N-methyl anthranilate has got some new levels. Some of them have gone up from nothing to something, but some have been reduced. Paracresol has been restricted. However, that is the only specific isomer. So not ortho or meta has been restricted. However, the standard does refer to mixed cresols. So where there's a mixture of creosoles, the limits apply to that item, even if it includes ortho meta, but it doesn't apply directly to specific isomers O or M. 2 new Cas numbers are included for the standard for farnesol and 1 additional one for mint lactone. These are not officially in the IFRA 51st updates, so they kind of remain as IFRA 49 or 50 standards, but they just have had this admin modification to them. So what remains the same? There are over 200 IFRA standards which have not been amended in the 51st Amendment. So many of these are specifications or prohibitions, and as you might expect, nothing has been unprohibited. So if you couldn't use it before, you still can't use it. And as I mentioned earlier, reed diffusers remain in category 10A, not category 12. This is a slightly contentious issue which has been discussed quite a bit already, and so it may be reviewed again in the 52nd Amendment, and possibly reed diffusers will move back to non-skin. But for now, they remain in category 10A. So getting the data into Formpak. So we're creating a reference data set of all the items included in the 51st Amendment, whether they're new, amended, or pre-existing. Any Plus customers will receive an update to their system where items will be directly imported with the data already applied. Because this is included in your Formpak maintenance, there won't be any additional cost, as your package already has managed data for a set of raw materials. So any customers that are not Plus customers may opt to have a data import based on CAS matching. Many of you will have had this done before for labeling manual updates or importing your own data, IFRA 49 update, that sort of thing. And the basic process is that the user outputs all raw materials into an item matching file from a search in Find Matching Items and sends it to Formpak, who smash it together with the reference data set. And where the user's CAS numbers and reference CAS numbers match, they're entered into an items matched by CAS spreadsheet, which is then checked by us at Formpak and then sent to you, the user, for checking. And then when that's returned, checked, the data and components are imported. So the cost for the data matching process is £825. It's also possible to pay in US dollars and euros. And the fee is based on the time it takes us to process and import the data. So as I said earlier, the same property groups and properties, the same applications, the same suitability, and the same documents will be used after the 51st data is entered. So that will require the document to have document content updated to reflect that it's now displaying data from the 51st Amendment and not any previous version. So for Plus customers, this will be automatically imported when we import your items. For any customers that opt to have the CAS matching process, these will be automatically imported along with your data. Anyone who's opting to update the 51st data manually will either need to manually change the document content or request a separate update from us to import the document content at the right time. This slide demonstrates how to manually update document content should that be the chosen option. So it's possible for us to import this, but if you want to update it manually, you search for manage document content in the menu, find the appropriate code, which is IFRA 49.cert.compulsoryinfo. Click search, and then it will show the current value for that document content, which in the top picture shows 50th Amendment. And then you just click edit to modify that and make the necessary changes. So you see in the bottom box it's changed from 50th to 51st, and then the published date of June 2023. And then when that's saved, any documents printed will reflect the 51st Amendment of June 2023 and not anything that it said before. So a couple of questions. Why are there still references to IFRA 49? So with the implementation of IFRA 49, they introduced the QRA2 calculation method, and at this point, they did away with IFRA classes and only went forward with solely IFRA categories. And this meant that the way limits were calculated for mixtures changed fundamentally and required a new set of properties. So the properties for IFRA 48 and previous amendments were left remaining on people's systems at the time of IFRA 49, and a new set was added. And these properties and property groups and associated applications and suitability parameters bore the name IFRA 49 to distinguish them from the previous properties. But of course now they've gone a bit out of date. Now we're up to 51. However, it's really important not to rename any properties or property groups, any other parameters from 49 to 51, other than the document content. Otherwise, the properties may stop calculating correctly. Can I update the data in my system manually? Absolutely, yes, you can. However, there is a lot of it. So it may be more cost effective to invest in an import than to spend a long time on manual data entry. I would say there's at least a good week's work there, and of course, potential errors. So if you want to do it manually, that's fine. But as I say, we offer the data and item import. That's me all done, unless there are any questions.